We've invited you all here today because in your own ways, you all have direct experience participating in, leading and organizing Indigenous land-based learning programs in Northern communities. As you all know, we're now in the situation of a global pandemic, and so governments and funders and institutions, in response to this new reality, are pushing education to move online. This obviously presents a series of challenges to Indigenous people in terms of our knowledge systems and our ethics, our responsibilities to our elders and knowledge holders, the bush economy, and to Northern Indigenous students. One of the beautiful things about the Indigenous response to the pandemic for me came from Dene National Chief Norman Yakalea when he encouraged the Dene to go back to the land during the pandemic in the national media. He said, "The blood of the Dene is in the land. The land loves the Dene people, and we in turn love the land. Our values as Dene, the sharing, has come back, and it is still alive with fish and caribou." And then what helped our communities heal from the 1928 flu epidemic was recollecting with the land. This struck me because what the National Chief was saying was opposite to what mainstream educational institutions were saying in the South. He wasn't telling us to move on to Zoom. He was telling his people that the safest place to be was the land. And so that's what we wanted to give some space to some Northern Indigenous brilliance today to discuss that. So I think to begin, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves in whatever way that you're comfortable, and maybe just talk a little bit about what you've learned from the land. So Christina, can we start with you?
Yeah, I was like, oh, please don't start with me. But yeah, I don't know, like I feel so out of my depth with all of you guys. I live in Prince Rupert, and this is part of the traditional territories of the Tsimshian people. So on my mom's side of the family, I'm Tsimshian, and it's a matrilineal community and legal system. And I really followed my mom's legal system. My dad was Dene, and he was born in Yellowknife, and a member of Lutzelke, and spent most of his life in Vancouver. And that's where I was born and raised. I was born in the hospital in downtown Vancouver and lived most of my life in East Vancouver with my mom. And I think since the pandemic started, I feel like it really shook a lot of communities all over the world. And I like to refer to it as a time of global suffering, because it's not just, I think the pandemic really goes just beyond like what's happening internally, like inside of the body, but also externally as well. And so I spent a lot of time inside actually since the pandemic happened, whereas before I was spending a lot of time outside. I think that has resulted in a lot of suffering, is spending so much time inside. And so I think in thinking about being on the land and connecting with the land, I think that's very important. But I was also more fearful of having other people feel fearful of me and being in their space, or like, you know, the moisture and like the droplets that were being spoken about a lot in the media. and I didn't want anyone else to feel fearful of my presence as well. So, but I also moved partway in the pandemic from Victoria, where I was living, to Prince Rupert. And since coming to Prince Rupert, I spent a lot more time outside on the land with my cousins and family, just fishing off of the side of the dock. And I think that's been really healing. And I don't think that it's as accessible in cities, or it's more frowned upon. There's a lot more people around, so it's a lot harder to get outside on the land. And I think there's big differences between being in the north, where there's a lot less people and there's a lot more land, in comparison to being in the south, where there's a lot less land and a lot more people. So I think those are also important considerations. And so I don't really have much more to say. So Josh, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christina. So my name's Josh Barichello, and in speaking of feeling out of depth or something, I'm the I think I'm the only non-Indigenous person here, so I'm feeling that a bit too. But so I'm Kuskani, which is how Kaska Dene people call white settlers living in their territory, and I live in Robby's community, Tuathlidlini, or Ross River, and work closely with the Elders Council there, and have for a long time, for most of my adult life, and work with youth and do various land-based education programs there. And really lucky to be there and to spend a lot of time on the land with Dene Brilliance. And I think in talking about the pandemic, it's been scary in Ross for sure, and in all of the north. I think there's like some kind of fear of if and when it were to come into the communities, the impacts of that, especially with like a community like Tuathlidlini, where people are so social and the visiting is such a core part of the culture, and there's so much, like such a support network that needs physical connection, I think. And so there's so many elders like living alone or living with family, I mean living with younger people, and houses that have multiple families together. So there's that fear, but I think what we've seen since the pandemic's really taken off in Tuathlidlini is I've seen a lot of families going back to the land. So like Leanne was saying about the Norman Yakalaya's message, seen a lot of families on the land more than usual. And it's also been spring, so it's been a beautiful time of year to be out there and lots going on. And for myself, I feel lucky that I've been on the land more than normal, because some of the other work obligations have sort of slowed down a little bit, and it's just becoming a bit more normalized for people to maybe come into town less often and to spend longer periods of time in their cabins with their families in the bush. And so that's been sort of a blessing as well. But yeah, excited to and honored to be talking amongst you today.
Bless you, Josh. Siku, can you go next?
Yeah, hello, my friends. It's so nice to be with you in this conversation. I was born and raised in Saagiig in Yellowknife, and my dad is from Michi from northern Nunavut, Baffin Island, and my mom was from Haiti, Kaska, and was Taino, and a mix of European and African and Taino heritage. So part of all of those different lineages, and I'm also part of the Dene family from Fort Fitzgerald, Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. And I was part of I'm losing my words. In the pilot program with Dechinta, that was my first real experience with land-based education. And it really changed my whole understanding of the importance of being connected to the land, because I was a university student at the time, going to school in Victoria, and becoming pretty radicalized with Indigenous education, learning about decolonization and the super heavy colonial legacy that's still ongoing, and all the resistance efforts that Indigenous peoples and Black peoples and people of color have led in different parts of the world at different times to fight against that. And it was really impacting my understanding of space. I really identify with what you were saying, Christina, about being in a city, in like an urban setting, and being worried about, at that time I wasn't worried about a pandemic, but I was worried about colonialism and its impact on me and people like me, and feeling more and more threatened and more also like aware that my existence is also a threat. And I felt quite vulnerable, and I was really happy that the Dechinta was starting to create this whole organization and this education program, because it was an opportunity for me to leave the institution, go back home to the territory where I was born and raised on, and to reset the values that I was raised with as a little girl. In our elementary programs, we had culture days. So we would be able to spend like a day out at a camp or a day on the land with elders, and they would take us on bushwalks and teach us about medicines and all the kinds of things that a lot of the Dechinta bush team lead in the Saagiig area today. And those things, I've always remembered those things. And they've informed the way that I look at the land, and spending time out on the land with my family, having that being the normalized experience, I think has a lot to do with the reason why the land for me is a place of comfort and healing and grounding. I think that what I learned in my time as a student at Dechinta was that there's been so much that we've inherited through so many generations now of colonialism that has impacted our ways of relating, and that the land can be a super transformative place, a really potent, beautiful place to restore those connections, and that those connections really like nourish you as a human being. And they undo a lot of the damage. And so I don't want to jump too far ahead in this conversation, but that's been on my mind for like the last 10 years, about why the land is important in an education setting. But as a facilitator and coordinator of programs since then, I've also been in the position to hold the space for students, and my intention in that role is always to try and create a setting for Dene students to come and learn, not learn, but experience what it's like to live in a Dene setting. Like, in a Dene community based on relationships and values that are important, that those are the things that guide the ways that everybody is there and does everything that we do together. There's a lot of intangibles that come with that, and but they end up being the most important things, the things that are not identifiable by Western or colonial society or value systems. They're things like interconnection and reciprocity and consent and care and relationship, and all of these things that are skills that we need to live as human beings in functional relationships with each other. And those are all the residual things that have been taken away from us systematically. And so to me, being on the land, we're always told that things are relational. Like when people say all my relations, it's an acknowledgement that we exist in these relationships. And I think that's, to me, the most important teaching that I'm always having reaffirmed when I'm on the land and in settings with a group of people on the land, is that everything is relational, and that relationality is so deeply important. Thanks.
Thank you much, Siku. Robby?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Robby Dick, and I live in Tuklilini, Ross River. Yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, so glad to see you guys. For me, yeah, the relationship to the land is pretty vital, I think, for everyone that's that has that relationship, that connection to the land. And for me, that's where I find my sanctuary out there. Like, I'm currently in leadership, and it's pretty stressful. And not gonna lie, when I feel bogged down or something, I just like go for a drive or something. I find I find a place that I feel comfort in. Where I feel comfort now is like being out on the land. And this past spring, we spent the extensive amount of time on the land because of the pandemic, and yeah, it was really, it's who we are as a Dene people, and to have that relationship with the land. And I guess like with this pandemic, it's been pretty tough. A lot of our members here were pretty apprehensive when the first case was found in Whitehorse here, and we're pretty. A lot of people were on edge, and it was pretty stressful too. But yeah, this pandemic and its challenges has been pretty tough on all First Nations. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we lost a few members of our own this past spring, and as Dene people, we come together and we want to share, show compassion to when someone passes away, and we can't even do that because of the pandemic and all these regulations and guidelines that you have to follow, and people being on edge too. And yeah, it was pretty challenging, the pandemic and all. But but I also think too, like just touching on what you guys are saying about education on the land, it's very it's important. It's for the kids coming behind us, for the next generation. As myself, I was first immersed into this pilot program that we had in 2015. Out at Dechinta, I got to meet Kristen and a few others there, and it was a good time. And that's when I realized like these programs are important for our communities and for land-based education. And I went to Dechinta in 2017. I got to meet Siku and a few others. I learned a lot from people that have that knowledge, the Indigenous knowledge and worldview. And like high tanning, for example. It's a lot of work, and it's beautiful too. And just to see like you work on moose hide, from beginning to finish, and you just feel that gratitude, like after you're done it, and you feel accomplished, you feel Dene, it makes you feel real good. And I remember coming back from Dechinta in 2017. I was really proud, just that's a kind of inspiration that these land-based programs bring to communities such as Ross River and abroad, I think. But anyways, thank you for having me, and look forward to having more of these discussions. Must see.
Must see, Robby. Kristen?
Hey everyone, Kristen Tanche Suje Thlithikwe Gotseate, Semo Kapi Tanche Uje Seta Gunnar Paulson Uje. My name is Kristen Tanche. I live in Fort Simpson, Thlithikwe, Northwest Territories. My mom is Kathy Tanche and my dad is Gunnar Paulson. I'm part of the Thlithikwe First Nation, and I am part of the Decho First Nations, and I also work for Decho First Nations right now. A little bit about who I am, and I guess my relation to On the Land programming is that for the past maybe about 2.5 years, I've been working in On the Land programming, coordinating and leading it at the regional level for my First Nation. And then my first experience was through Dechinta, taking their program. I think it was a couple years after you actually, Siku, that I was in the program. And I took the program 3 times, and then one summer I got so involved with Dechinta. I not only worked for them, I was on their board, then I took their program. So highly involved with Dechinta and super passionate about On the Land programming. What I've learned from the land, I think, is who I am as a person. Coming from a mixed background, my father's Icelandic, he's Canadian, typical kind of a mixture of everything in Canada, and my mother is Thlithikwe First Nation and Decho Dene, and part Lecho actually. So grew up in a mixed background. Grew up a lot in Saskatchewan, grew up in Fort Simpson, grew up in the Lecho Nation. And it's pretty confusing, I think, growing up as a person of mixed ancestry, not really in your homeland, not with your mother and her people, trying to figure out and navigate who you are. And it was on the land where I think I really learned that who I am as a person is Dene, and I'm Decho Dene. And that connection was really made through teachings of just being with Indigenous people and the types of things that you might learn being on the land with other people too. That to me, being Dene doesn't mean that I could hunt a moose, or it doesn't mean that I can bead or sew. Who I am as a Dene person is how I feel. And I think that's what really I learned from being on the land. My first time being on my homeland extensively was through the Dechinta program when we canoed from Fort Providence to Fort Good Hope. We spent a month on the riverbanks of the Decho, and it was there that I really started to feel that connection to my people's land. And so it really defines who I am. And I've been so blessed through my employment to work with a lot of elders and cultural knowledge holders, and to be able to learn more from them and learn my language and my cultural practices. So it's been a really amazing journey, and it hasn't stopped. Recently went on the land and set up our first tarp shelter. I was super proud. I kept thinking there's a couple elders in our region, and one of them calls it tarpology, Jonas Antoine from Willow River. And I kept saying to my husband, what would Jonas do? What would, there's another cultural knowledge holder that his name is Cheeky, his nickname is Cheeky. And so I kept thinking in my head, what would Cheeky do? What would Jonas do? How would they set up this tarp? So I felt super proud of our tarp skills. So yeah, and in regards to the pandemic, it's been really crazy. The Northwest Territories is a really confusing place to be right now. They lift restrictions, they place them, they lift them. But at the beginning, I think it was really scary. I lost a lot of my family members in a pandemic, like way back in the day. So my grandparent
was the only survivor of this pandemic. Him and two of his siblings and his father, all of them perished in that pandemic. And so I was telling my mom at the beginning of it, you know, the last time there was a huge pandemic like this, we lost more than half of our family members. And so I think for a lot of our elders and the people that live through that, it's really reliving trauma and really reliving huge loss. We haven't gotten to that point in our communities or in the Northwest Territories, but that fear is there. And so it has been scary, and I think it brings back a lot of memories for a lot of people. Robby was talking about not being able to gather, and I think that's another really kind of traumatic thing that probably people are experiencing, that back in the day we were told as Dene people that we could not gather, that you could not have a drum dance, or you could not have hand games, or even be with 10 people of your own people when we were such a social people. So having a government system being, again, for our own safety, and I understand that this is a pandemic, but I also understand how tough it could be and how tough it is for Dene people, and how it brings back memories. So, but we're all still here, and we're all staying safe relatively in the Dechinta region, and summer is here, and people have been going on the land like crazy. So, merci Chuck.
Merci, Kristen. So that was a really beautiful way to start, everybody. Thank you. What I heard was that it's a tough time in your communities right now, that there's a lot of fear, that there's been a lot of stress, that people are reliving the pandemic from 1928. People are probably being reminded of other times in our history where we weren't allowed to gather, or we weren't allowed to be on the land. And then also, I heard a lot of you talking about how important the land is in terms of sanctuary, I think is what Robby said, in terms of healing, in terms of teaching us who we are as Indigenous people, and in terms of connecting us to our ancestors, connecting us to our people and to our homelands and to our language. Kristen, can you talk about, right now we are supposed to be in your homeland on your river, delivering a program that we postponed. Can you talk about that process of deciding that we can't do the canoe trip on Zoom and that we need to cancel it?
Yes. So Dechinta First Nations and Dechinta were planning to join forces for our annual Yenda Goa canoe excursion. It would have been our third one in a row where we canoe and bring younger people and like youth and young adults to the annual Dechinta Assembly. So we had planned to start it in June. And when the pandemic hit in March, I think we gave it maybe a few weeks and realized this might not be safe. First off, we don't know if there's going to be a vaccine, or there's just all these big questions. And then the Dechinta Assembly was canceled also. So it's like this is like a huge piece. So at the end of our canoe trips, we always bring our youth, and it's like a way to engage them too in our annual leadership processes. Every year, all of our people come together in this forum with the chiefs, with council members, with community members, with Dechinta First Nation staff, and make some really important decisions for the region every year. It's also a time then everybody comes together for a social gathering. So people have drum dances, there's talent shows, there's feasts. And so it's a huge part of the program. And we really had to make that decision to cancel it because it brought together people from the entire region. And there's more risk with that. They've since changed the rules, but it's kind of a bit too late. So it was a heartbreaking decision, but one that had to be made for the safety of our people and for the safety of the staff and for the participants, to make sure that everyone was going to be safe and we wouldn't compromise anyone. So And you can't teach people those things online. You definitely cannot teach someone how to canoe via Zoom. You need to be engaged, you need to be on the land. As part of the program, a lot of the youth get to revisit or visit for the first time the territory where their family members have lived and for like their whole lives. And so you can't do that online. They need to be there. It's part of like walking in your ancestors' trails, essentially. It's paddling the water that your ancestors paddle. It's those connections that you cannot feel and that you cannot share online or in any other way by being there and being immersed within on the land and doing those types of things. So yeah.
Yeah. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
So Robby, I wanted to ask you, because last summer I spent time in your territory and at Dechinta, and I learned a lot about Dene ethics and protocols and practices and the Dene laws, not by attending a Zoom webinar or by reading, but by watching how your elders lived and how they conducted themselves and how they took care of the community, what they did when they harvested animals, how they were in the world. So can you talk a little bit about that embodiment of Dene laws and what that means for Dene youth living out on the land, and how that becomes challenging with online learning?
Sure, I can touch on that. So here in Ross, there's not really a way of like translating like Dene law. Like we say ai, and it comprises of just respect. So it's all based on respect and reciprocity and our connection to the land and anyways, when you harvest a moose or a caribou as a young person, like could be a woman or a man, or your first moose or your first caribou or whatever, it's by due law, it's by respect, that you give away your first big kill, and that's their introduction into to the the practices that we so long practiced throughout history. And when I first got my moose, I knew, like, as a young Dene, like I kind of knew, because I've heard stories like how people, like anything, you give away your first kill. When I was a kid, I remember it was, I don't know, like 4 or 5. I was out on a camping trip with my parents, and I was by the river, and there was a grayling that was swimming around, and it jumped out of the water in front of me. And I grabbed that grayling and I brought it to my dad. My dad was like, "Yeah, you got your first fish." He said, "Gotta cut your hat now." So he grabbed my hat, cut my favorite hat. I remember it was a Batman hat. I was so mad. As a kid, I didn't understand. But as I got older, I tend to think on those things, and I'm still learning. Yeah. But yeah, it's based on respect, and how you show that respect to the land when you're out on the land. You offer tobacco, or you just pray. You always pray when you go out, and you tell someone where you're going, and yeah, you just there's a lot of, as a young person, we have to include those practices into these curriculums. But to have these land-based programs, you tend to learn out there. And as a kid too, I was always I didn't view it as a school, you know. It was more like you learn by watching, and how they, you know, cut up caribou or, you know, moose, and how they you know, they show respect. And you know, I always think of my grandpa Amos, you know, you know, he's pretty good at what he does, and he's always he's always giving and sharing, and that's part of you know, Dene practices too. You always share what you have, and you be respectful, and yeah, it's you know, elders, they always say it's just have respect for the land, you know, pick up after yourself and share what you have, and yeah, you be good to one another. I don't know if Josh wants to add anything to that, but let's see.
I think too, it's sort of like you both alluded to there, that there's to me it's impossible to write it all down, or to like, we've been working with the Elders Council for the past while. There's been a number of times where we've tried to document like a code of ethics in some way, that for different projects, like maybe for example, for this hunting permitting system that the elders are putting in place, advocating that visitors that come to their territory are respectful of the ethics of that territory, the Dene ethics of that territory. And I think it's impossible to capture that on paper, or to capture that in a Zoom call. And it's almost like similar to what Leanne was saying about just watching and experiencing how people conduct themselves. And so that's where, to me, the challenges would be around that, big challenges around that, because we can't predict what's going to happen. But there's, in spending, you know, enough time with elders and knowledge holders, you can watch and observe how that they react and how they speak about different things, how they deal with the variables that are constantly changing, how they deal with maybe a conflict at camp, or how they deal with the weather that's changing, and you know, harvesting something to fish, for example. Just all the different ethical practices associated with just that, I think, don't lend themselves to being written down or being sort of taught without the water, and without the fish, and without the elements that are part of it.
And Josh, I know we had a conversation the other day in terms of your own research about some of the risks or some of the worries that you have in terms of bringing Indigenous words, Indigenous concepts, Indigenous knowledge, making it widely accessible to people through the internet, or through thesis writing, or through books. So I'm wondering if you can talk about, you know, what would you worry about? What are some of the potential risks of, like, posting a video of an elder harvesting medicine, or discussing a story? What are some of the things that you might worry about ethically in terms of that kind of opening up access away from the knowledge holder?
Well, for one, just being who is a different set of ethics around sharing anything than there would be for a Dene person from there. So that's an added layer of complexity. But also, I think universally, like in spending a lot of time with the elders, if you're talking about something like harvesting a plant, there's a few concerns that have been brought up many times by the elders in Ross. So one is just the fact that there's companies that could exploit that knowledge and turn these plants into pharmaceutical, or into pill form, and sell them. And so just normal capitalism exploiting. There's also, I think, the fact that a lot of that relationship with the plant can't really be, definitely can't be taught in a book so well, I think, although that's a good start maybe, but it's so much different than being touching the spruce tree, for example, and being with somebody that's got a deep, long-lasting relationship to that spruce tree on the land together. And the kind of like what I was saying before, I guess the ethical practices around that just necessarily need to have that relationship, I think. And then the fact that if you're sharing something, you don't know who's going to take it up always. And like with Dene knowledge, with the knowledge of the Tuathlidlini Dene, most things are considered communally, like a communal responsibility to govern how that knowledge is interpreted. And so, like I was saying to you, Leanne, I think in my thesis, it's challenging because even though I have many conversations with folks that say that this is good to, that's a good story, that needs to be part of the story you want to tell, and there is some benefits in telling the story too, it still always feels a little complicated because there's so many people who you can't talk to, even people that are gone or people that are not yet. And so that communal kind of right, or however you want to word it, the communal right to the knowledge is we're just so different than how the European dominant kind of culture teaches us to view knowledge. And so putting anything online or available to the public has some tremendous implications maybe around how people are going to hear it and what they might do with it, without maybe the embedded sort of accountability that's a part of like being in place with people all the time, with knowledge holders.
Christina, do you have anything that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's something I think a lot about. I didn't mention this when I did my introduction, but I'm also a lawyer, and I've been a lawyer for about 5 years now. And I'm now a practicing lawyer in British Columbia, and I try to think about all of the different ways that laws can be interpreted, or that arguments, like how you form an argument, and how it could be interpreted by the other side, or how it could be interpreted in future decisions. Like, you don't want to create bad precedents, basically. And it's kind of similar as a researcher as well, because I'm doing my master's in law right now, and I'll start my doctoral studies in January. And I try to think about how, like, my research, when I'm going to be working with people and interviewing people, I think about their, like, people's own autonomy and when they share knowledge and why they share it. So for my master's thesis, for example, like, I'm looking at secondary source knowledge. So, like, I went to the archives and I read a lot of books, and look at who's sharing knowledge at a time. Like, so for example, there were a lot of interviews that were happening around 1900 to 1915. And I think it's also really important to give give credence basically to the people who are sharing those stories at that time, because I think about, like, I don't have grandmothers on both sides of my family, so there's a whole generation of knowledge that was just, like, completely lost. And I think we also talked about trauma in this discussion, and just a lot of trauma in like a few generations as a result of colonization. And I try to think about the people who were sharing knowledge at that time, and they wanted to share that knowledge. They wanted to share the knowledge to ensure that there was some continuity in being able to pass it on. But then I also think about the harms as well. In now what we call Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge, or Indigenous law as well. So, and unforeseen harms, which I think, or unforeseen consequences of sharing that knowledge, which could result in harms. So I think it just involves like a really thoughtful, methodical approach in sharing. But I'm not sure if that just goes to like methodological issues or ethical considerations of that knowledge sharing. And I think when we do it over Zoom, like it's like so impersonal and not real. Like it's like you guys are sitting on my table right now, and there's like 7 little squares, and it would be really different in comparison to like if you guys are over at my house and we're having tea, and we can't do that right now, right? Like we're all in very different parts of the country, and it would be really cool if we could do that. But it's just not possible. So I think it's like the plus side and the downside of the pandemic is that we're able to have these conversations that we normally wouldn't have, perhaps. Like I talk way more now with people over Zoom looking at a wall and looking at a screen than I did pre-pandemic, where it was just a lot easier to come and go as I please. So I don't know, I kind of threw a lot out there, but yeah, I just think that there's so many different considerations and how knowledge is shared and the platform and the unforeseeable consequences of sharing that knowledge, that I think that a lot of care and consideration to the process is really important.
Thank you, Christina. That was really, you brought up some really excellent points about how we need to think through what we're sharing, what we're asking our elders and our knowledge holders to do carefully. Because I think you also brought up some good points in terms of isolation, particularly for our students that are in cities or that are in the South or that are away from their territories, that don't have access to the land, don't have access to their language, and now can't travel back. So it's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation with you guys is to try to talk that out and think that through and see if there's ways that we can continue to connect with our students and take care of our knowledge holders while still in an ethical way, as Robby said, in a responsible way, and as an interim plan until we can have this conversation fishing with you on the dock, Christina, or on the river, on the Decho with Kristen, or in the sugar bush with me, or in Robby's territory. Because I think if we were on the land right now together, we would be having a different conversation. Siku, you talked a lot about things that the land taught you that are not easy to sort of quantify in an evaluation, like if some land-based practices like hunting and fishing and trapping and moose hide tanning, there's a very tangible thing at the end. I have a very holy moose hide that's not very well tanned, or some fish that are not very dry. But there's also a whole bunch of other things that you learn in camp life, like consent and how to solve problems and respect and responsibility. And can you talk a little bit about that Dene communal life that you get when you're in a longer term land immersive kind of program?
Yeah, totally. That, to me, those are the things that land the most deeply for me on a personal level, and in terms of my thinking about what I want to try and create in the world for our communities. There was something that Ethel Lamott said to me when we were actually working on her moose hide, and we were talking. I was mostly talking and was saying how it's so important. The Dene values are so important for young people to be learning, to be taking up. And she was saying, yeah, but what does it mean to be Dene? And I said, it's the values, it's the values. And she said, no, it's the being. And it really stopped me. And I had to think more deeply about what she meant and kind of expand my understanding. And that's ultimately what, Kristen, what you were saying about what the land has taught you about who you are. And also Kaska elder that we worked with last summer in Robby's territory, Normisteria, he kept saying more and more in his life, he's come to understand that being Dene is a code of ethics, and it's a way of being. And that to me is the most important part about what Dechinta does, and the communal life that we strive to create is that setting for students and teachers, and the whole team, the whole community, to live within a code of ethics that is rooted in that land and that knowledge system, that value system, that life-affirming way of being. I also see it with Justina and how she runs that Kids U, and how important it is. Like, it's astounding to spend time learning, like just witnessing what those kids are learning through their time with Justina and the other elders there, because she's taking what I grew up seeing as the Dene laws, which were on a poster on the wall in a classroom or in offices, and they seem flat in that when they're posted on a wall. And Justina brings those to life. She's teaching, what I saw is like just teaching the kids about what it is to practice those laws with each other and with the land. And it's a whole other thing entirely. I know in Western education, the ways of learning are normalized with a separation between a student and the teachers, and you're not supposed to really develop close relationships interpersonally. Those are not really supposed to exist beyond the life of that 1.5 hour slot that you have 3 times a week or whatever for one semester. And there's no real longevity or accountability. And also with the scheduling, this made up way of organizing time that Western society has, which is so removed from the actual the land, the weather, the gifts that kind of present themselves. And that when you're in a setting on the land and you have to stop because somebody brought a caribou, and that caribou needs to be respected and prioritized, and like the teachings that are there come first and everything else comes later, or we can be planning for something, an excursion or whatever, and we're humbled as human beings to know that we can't dictate the weather. And actually, if we do not pay attention to what the land is saying and what the weather is doing, then our safety is impacted. And as human beings, that's, I think, more important. It's more realistic to understand the world that way and our relationship to the world. And I worry about technology a lot. I've always worried about technology when it comes to trying to develop young people. The ways that I've seen people in generations younger than me relate to technology is really concerning to me, because I've witnessed the association with all other kinds of traumas and anxieties through those spaces, social media and technology. And even just when you're not in cell range, having something like constantly having something up and seeing, being aware of your own image all the time as the reflection that you're focused on, versus being able to focus on your relationship to the people around you and to other generations of people around you and to other life forms. It's really extremely important that Indigenous ways of learning, that we maintain those ways of learning, that the ways are just as important, and often they can be more important in certain ways than what you were actually learning. Those, like the skill, what I've been taught is skill development can happen at any time, but learning, the things that kind of come before, like learning by watching as an important developmental thing that you teach young people, or that young people learn by watching, and then they learn by doing, and they learn by doing through having those in-person relationships with somebody that has patience and is trustworthy and is caring and supportive. That is so extremely important for young people to have in that vulnerable time of gaining skills and knowledge. And those relationships are the things that are going to build them as a person. And when you experience care and consideration and love and connection, those, you walk in the world a different way. You don't feel so isolated and like everything is on you and what you know and what you don't know. You're not isolated in that kind of experience, and you have a whole bunch more coping skills. And I think that those are things that continually come up in the settings of Dechinta programming, because those just come up as human beings. We're so much more human when we're there, and we're forced to be more real about what we're struggling with. Or I always think it's kind of like a temperature check, or something like that, where it's like, okay, here's where the state of the work needs to happen in Indigenous resurgence, and working it and supporting it. These are all the sites is where those human kind of things come up. I hope that makes sense.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Siku. Kristen, can you tell us or talk a little bit more about how the ethics of sharing Dene knowledge? What are some of the risks? How do we behave in a responsible way? and how do we facilitate sort of young people learning that knowledge in the time of a pandemic? How do we support those knowledge holders?
Well, Leanne, I was hoping you would ask me this question. As people were talking, I was like, hey, we just did a video series. We put it online. It's all about Decho culture. They're really amazing videos. So Decho First Nation some time ago decided to make a video series of elders and cultural knowledge holders and a few youth doing some on-the-land activities. And the video series is focused around a week of being together on the ground in the Catlo Deche First Nations territory. We did a video on Dene laws. We did a video on Dene laws and stories, camp setup. We did a video on plant wisdom and spruce tree to really share our language and share our culture. And we, as people were talking, I was thinking about, how do we do that ethically? Because I'm super proud of it. The nation's super proud of it. Our elders are super proud of it. And I think what the difference is that it was done by us. We decided, we asked elders, like, what do you want to share? Remember, this is going to be online. Everybody from everywhere is going to be able to see this. We didn't share like our favorite berry spots for sure. We didn't share any of our like traditional land knowledge and our places of importance. Definitely did not share berry spots on those videos. But we shared knowledge that everybody could really learn from, and I think really appreciate, but like our own people too, because we're living in an era where everybody is online and everybody is going through Facebook and going on YouTube, and why not use that to, I guess, help promote our language. It's a huge importance in our region and all over in all the Indigenous areas and communities to really keep the language strong, keep those teachings strong. And so we did it through video, and eventually they'll come out in booklets so people can use them as resources to learn our language. We were really thinking about our own people, but I think that other people are going to benefit from our work also by viewing them. The Pleat Show just came out with a video series too about the same time, and they have they're following their elders and stuff. I can't speak to it because it's not one of my projects and I'm not Pleat Show, but amazing videos that they did too, and they came out at the same time as ours. So I think, and I really thought about this one, it really depends. Like we can make a video about canoeing in Dene Shati, but you still have to experience it. We can make videos about spruce tree, but you still have to go out there and touch the spruce tree and smell the spruce tree. So I think videos and putting things online can be really great if it's done in a really appropriate way by the people, for the people, and on the people's terms, sharing what they want to be shared. But there is always risks. There's always risks of cultural appropriation, access to our knowledge, but the knowledge holders have the power of sharing that knowledge, and they know if they want to share it with people beyond the people in their community and further. So yeah, it's a depends on the situation, depends what's being taught. It can be done, not fully done. I would never be like, we're not doing a canoe trip, we're just going to do everything online, but I will be like, here's some Dene laws and value stories that your aunties and your uncles and your grandparents made, and they want to ensure that all generations after them have access to these beautiful, amazing teachings. So here they are in our language.
Merci, that sounds so awesome and so powerful. And so I think that's really, really key. It has to be by the people, for the people, on their terms, and with their informed, continual, enthusiastic consent. And it sounds like those videos might really inspire youth to want to go out on the river, to might ask their Etsu questions, to get more involved in this kind of education. I'm aware of the time because you guys have all been very generous with your time and your knowledge. Robby, is there things that would your community be interested in doing a video project like that on your own terms? Are there things that you need at the community level that you're not getting, kinds of support that would help people continue to connect, help you to connect to the land during the time of the pandemic?
Yeah, we could sure use a support, and you know, and yeah, we could definitely use some support, and you know, Josh could possibly help with that too, and you know, we got some capacity here, and yeah, we're more than willing to, you know, sit down with our elders and, you know, document language or anything that's going to be vital for, you know, our next generation of kids coming behind us. And yeah.
So not as a replacement for the land, but as sort of a temporary measure until we can get back out there and be in the same space on the land together. Do any of you have any final comments that you'd like to add, or anything that we haven't covered?
The only other thing is that I've been thinking about access to internet and computers too in the North as another huge kind of consideration.
Sure. So there's an assumption in all of this that in the South that Southern institutions are making, and that is that there is high-speed quality internet. Everybody has access to it, and that everybody has computers and Facebooks, or not Facebooks, I sound like I'm 150, iPads and computers. And that's often not the case. So maybe can you speak to that, Siku? You also told me a really lovely story last night about you trying to get your Dene dad to FaceTime you.
Yeah, so my Dene dad is 71 years old and has had a huge impact in the world and in the North, and is a really well-respected elder. And he just learned how to Zoom very recently, working with ICHR. And he told me that one of the young researchers there spent 2.5 hours on the phone calling him from Yellowknife to his home in Tabati in Fort Fitzgerald, walking him through how to do a Zoom call. And that 2.5 hours, he was really grateful that she was so patient. And yeah, just that's not something that, that is a whole new consideration for especially for elders, I think, of all nations, but especially for our elders. Yeah, just not everybody has computers and access to technology. It's not as accessible for us in, especially the more remote communities you go to. And internet is so expensive. It's really limited, and it's also only really in more urban spaces in the communities. So it would be, I think, very challenging to try and organize a Zoom call or something like that with somebody taking place on the land which has no Wi-Fi access. So there would be some really, really practical things that would need to be attended to in order to even make that possible for a lot of people.
And this organization sent your dad an iPad, right?
Yeah, they sent him, I don't know if it was an iPad or a laptop, but they sent him something, and they had to walk him all the way through it.
Yeah. Kristen?
Yeah, I completely agree. Since the pandemic, for example, I've had to work from home and I'm continuously running out of internet. There's me in the household, my niece, my family comes over, my husband's working from home, it's a problem. And they've even increased the internet usage. And so to like even envision, like how would you even move things like on the land teachings online is really difficult in the north because of the access to internet and computers, like you're saying, Siku. And one way that we try to be mindful of that in our Dene video and booklet project was to have USB sticks. Again, you need access to computers though, but also we're going to be printing like DVDs so most people have DVDs. And then the booklets to try to make sure that we're really encompassing all the different types of way of learning and being aware and really trying to be cognizant of the fact that not everybody has access to the internet, nor do they might not know how to use the services. But it's definitely a challenge to think about and something to always be mindful about.
Christina?
Thanks. I was looking for the raise the hand thing, but I couldn't find it. I was thinking about one of the questions that you had posed, or Kelsey had posed to us before, which is, what is the land teaching us now? And I guess around the beginning of the time of social distancing, or like at the beginning of the quarantine, then like I began to see a lot of stories on the internet about, or news stories on the internet about how like wildlife or animals were returning to cities. So like mountain goats were returning to, I think it was like North Vancouver. And like last week in the news, we saw a whale had returned to the St. Lawrence, and like whales were going into the Broad Inlet in Vancouver. And like there's just so many stories like that that I'm seeing across Canada at least. And there are quite a few oral histories that I've read, and I won't talk about one in particular, but basically in these oral histories, what happens is when animals aren't respected, then like they decide collectively that they're not going to give up their life for like the purpose of food. And one of them for Tsimshian people involves the mountain goat. And it really, like, I think I was really reminded of the importance of these oral histories at that time when I began to see those stories come out, and just how far removed we are from as a people, as all human people, not just like us in particular, but I think there's a lot of harms that happen to animals as a result of just people in general, like coming into these spaces, like with more cities or like natural resource extraction, and now there's less people going out to do these activities, or there's less people outside, so there's less of a threat of harm on animals. And so I just wanted to touch upon that and thinking about what is the land teaching us now. And I think it's a really good lesson on how to respect animals and respect the land, who are animals are on the land. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thanks.